The on-again, off-again relationship between Apple and Microsoft began in the late 1970s, during the dawn of the PC era. These hot and cold periods were often tied to the personalities of the company's founders and longtime leaders, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Today, Apple and Microsoft are very different companies, with new leaders who don't lug along the baggage that comes as a result of nearly 40 years of fierce competition. Today, we will discuss the events that define the long, rocky relationship between the two modern-day technology giants. It was 1975, when Bill Gates founded Microsoft to develop and sell the basic programming language for the Altair 8800, a microcomputer based on an Intel CPU. The following year, the first apple fell from the tree, or emerged from Steve Wozniak's Los Altos bedroom. Priced at $666.66, the first Apple computer ran on BASIC as well, and wasn't even fully assembled. It lacked a keyboard, monitor, and even a case. 50 of the early models, though, were sold to a local retailer, giving Apple's founders enough capital to keep their fledgling company afloat. Apple Computer Inc. was incorporated in early 1977, and within a few months, the two-man company consisting of Wozniak and his partner Steve Jobs released a second machine, the Apple II. The company's early strength was in software. With an open architecture platform, the Apple II won popularity among business customers for running the first Office spreadsheet program, called VisiCalc. The Apple II also supported a color screen and hard disk drives, as opposed to the then popular tape drives and grayscale displays. Yet even as the first platform with a useful Office app, Apple was still the third-place computer maker, trailing Tandy and Commodore. During the first Macintosh's development and early years of production, Microsoft was a critical Apple ally. The software pioneer created important programs for Apple's PC in the early 80s. "We had more people working on the Mac than Jobs did," Gates said of the early years, according to Walter Isaacson biography Steve Jobs. At an Apple event in 1983, Gates told attendees Microsoft expected to earn half of its revenues selling Macintosh software the following year. By the early 80s, Xerox had allowed Jobs and the Apple team to spend time inside their computing labs to look for inspiration. There, Jobs saw what was arguably the world's first graphical user interface, icons and menus as we know them today, with no coding knowledge required. Jobs was convinced that the GUI was the future of personal computing, and set about making the next Apple, dubbed Lisa, a GUI machine. All Xerox asked in return for its GUI secret was $1 million in pre-IPO Apple stock, which, in perhaps the most short-sighted business deal in the history of the industry, would later net the company a paltry $18 million. They grossly undervalued the whole point-and-click interface, which would go on to dominate personal computing unilaterally. Apple's Lisa was indeed a breakthrough in user interface, but sold poorly because of its nearly $10,000 price tag. By 1983, Microsoft had purchased and developed its own popular command line operating system, MS-DOS, which ran a handful of Redmond-made applications like Microsoft Press. While Apple struggled to figure out a way to market its new user interface economically, Microsoft was emerging as a major player in the software world. In fact, the January 1983 issue of Time magazine named the computer Machine of the Year for 1982, featuring a desktop on its cover with an article about the rise of the PC, followed by one about Jobs' role in the revolution. Personal computing had arrived. Isaacson's book detailed just how quickly the relationship between the two companies soured when they started to develop competing operating system software with graphical user interfaces. Jobs lashed out at Gates during a meeting later that same year and equated Microsoft's plan for Windows to theft. Xerox PARC originally developed graphical interfaces not for Apple, but for Jobs, that was beside the point. Isaacson also described the Microsoft founders' response to Jobs' accusations. Gates just sat there coolly, looking Steve in the eye, before hurling back in his squeaky voice what became a classic zinger. "Well, Steve, I think there's more than one way of looking at it. I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV set, and found out that you had already stolen it. It was only with Apple's second GUI effort, the cheaper Macintosh, that Apple earned a spot along Microsoft as a permanent fixture in the PC industry. Much of the hubbub was due to Apple's groundbreaking 1984 television advertisement during Super Bowl XVIII, which depicted the Macintosh as a maverick that subverted the Orwellian Big Brother. Microsoft released its first GUI OS in 1985, calling it Windows 1.0. But it wasn't until Windows 3.0 was released in 1990 that Windows became an Apple killer. By the late 80s, Microsoft gained steam and Apple suffered from internal conflicts that had culminated in Jobs' resignation in 1985. From that point onward, Apple and Microsoft pursued essentially parallel strategies, licensing their operating systems to clone computer makers and making beige box PCs. Yet Apple's clone machines often undercut the prices of their own product line, which was already confusing and arcane to consumers. Cheaper and more prolific Windows PCs saw more success on the retail floor, and Apple's stock and market share began to slide. Microsoft then went on to dominate the PC industry, while Jobs founded Next, where he spent the following 12 years building computer workstations for higher education and business. Jobs didn't prize significant market share away from Microsoft during his time with Next, but he did continue to regularly lob insults at Microsoft. The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste, Jobs said in the 1996 Triumph of the Nerds TV documentary. They have absolutely no taste. And I don't mean that in a small way, I mean that in a big way, in the sense that they don't think of original ideas, and they don't bring much culture into their products. Jobs also said Microsoft's applications for Mac were terrible, and called the company's products third-rate. He eventually spoke to the New York Times about the documentary and his decision to call Gates and apologize for his comments, but his statement felt disingenuous. I told him I believed every word of what I said, but that I never should have said it in public, Jobs told the newspaper. On August 24, 1995, Microsoft released its wildly popular Windows 95 operating system. The software, with its innovative start bar and bundled software, immediately changed the way people used computers, and sold more than 1 million copies in the first 4 days on the market. Meanwhile, Apple languished at the fringes of the market, allying itself with IBM and Motorola to produce a new set of processors, dubbed PowerPC, that they hoped would turn the company's fortunes around. Yet as they did so, money-wasting projects like the Newton handheld threatened to suck the company dry. When Apple acquired Next in 1997 and brought Steve Jobs back into the fold, the company was in disarray amid growing uncertainty about the future of Microsoft Office for Mac. During his keynote addresses at the Macworld Expo that year, Jobs extolled the virtues of partnering with industry leaders and spoke of the need to improve Apple's partner relationships. Jobs suggested Apple needed help from others, and that destructive relationships weren't helping any tech companies. Then he announced a new pact between Apple and Microsoft, which was received with a chorus of boos from the audience. The previously unimaginable deal had many components, including a perpetual cross-license for all existing patents and patents issued during the next 5 years. Internet Explorer became the default browser on Mac. Microsoft said it would release Office for Mac for the next 5 years, and Gates' company invested $150 million in Apple. Jobs tried to frame the deal in a way Mac users and Apple fans could appreciate. We need all the help we can get. If we screw up and we don't do a good job, it's not somebody else's fault. It's our fault, Jobs said. I think if we want Microsoft Office on the Mac, we better treat the company that puts it out with a little bit of gratitude. We like their software. The era of setting this up as a competition between Apple and Microsoft is over, as far as I'm concerned. Under Jobs, Apple managed to launch an online store and a wildly successful new computer called the iMac. The first truly internet-specific computer, the new model eschewed some industry standards embraced by PCs, such as serial ports and floppy drives, opting instead for CD drives and Ethernet and USB ports. Later, rolling out a candy-colored set of computers, Apple made personal computing fun, winning the hearts and money of younger computer buyers. Apple also concentrated on acquiring an array of professional and consumer-oriented software companies that would later lead Apple to regain its dominance in creative computing markets. Applications like Final Cut Pro, iMovie, iPhoto, and iTunes were sleek, attractive, easy to use, and worked well with Apple's hardware, a sharp contrast to many PCs, which required tedious driver installations and third-party software just to make their best features functional. Microsoft's ever-growing empire suffered a backlash in the late 1990s when the Justice Department filed a motion in the Federal District Court demanding that Microsoft uncouple its Internet Explorer browser from Windows in order to be fair to rival browser maker Netscape. Then, in 2000, the company suffered from an antitrust ruling that demanded it be split in two. That decision was later overturned. While Microsoft nursed its legal woes, Apple worked on releasing its new OS, called macOS X, which had grown out of Jobs' pet project at Next. Its open, Unix-based architecture was stable, secure, easy to use, and marked a turning point in the philosophy of personal computing. But with Apple's market share at less than 4%, it would be years before the industry took notice. Apple successfully conquered the MP3 player market with its release of the capacious hard drive-based iPod in October 2001. It soon became all but impossible to walk a block in a major American city without seeing white headphones in someone's ear. By the time Microsoft made its foray into the digital music player market, the iPod and iTunes combo had a staggering market share, and the scale to produce more capable players at a cheaper price. But the Zune's tepid reception has been outshone by the remarkable success of the Xbox, released in November 2001. For Microsoft, the video game formula was working. The company went on to release a number of successful game titles, including dorm room favorites such as Age of Empires and Halo. Securely back on its feet with the success of the iPod, iMac, and iLife software suite, Apple has once again taken aim at Redmond with its Mac vs. PC campaign, which has challenged the way consumers identify themselves. In 2006, Apple launched the first in this series of television advertisements featuring comedian John Hodgman as a stodgy PC user and actor Justin Long as the hip Apple enthusiast. The ads targeted a younger, cooler audience, but risked coming off as snarky. But with each successive quarter boasting record sales for Apple, the gamble looked to have paid off. Gates stepped down as CEO of Microsoft in 2000. In 2006, he began stepping away from the company in order to devote more of his energies to his philanthropic efforts. By the mid-2000s, Jobs had also returned to his old ways, and he chastised Microsoft for copying Google and Apple, despite having a $5 billion annual research and development budget. On January 9, 2007, Steve Jobs put Sneaker to stage for what was the most incredible keynote presentation of his life, and in the history of consumer electronics. The company had been working for over 2 years on the Purple Experience project. It had gone from a tablet to a phone, from a dream to a reality. And just before he stepped out in front of the crowd, Jobs assembled his team and told them to remember the moment before iPhone, because in the next moment, everything would change. During the keynote, Steve Jobs said it was rare enough for a company to revolutionize even one product category. Apple had already revolutionized two: computers with the Mac and personal music players with the iPod. With the iPhone, they'd be going for three. He set up and knocked down the physical keyboard and the stylus, features that dominated the BlackBerry, Motorola, and Palm smartphones of the day. Then, Jobs introduced the multi-touch interface that let the iPhone smoothly pinch to zoom, the physics-based interactivity that included inertial scrolling and rubber banding, and the multitasking that let him move seamlessly from music to call to web to email and back. The original iPhone ended up selling over 6 million units in its first year on 4 carriers in 4 countries. Now, the iPhone sells hundreds of millions a year on almost every carrier in almost every country. It's also been followed up by iPad, Apple TV, and Apple Watch, HomeKit and HealthKit, CarPlay and AirPlay, AirPods, and HomePod. Jobs remained CEO of Apple until he resigned for health reasons in August of 2011. He passed away 2 months later. In an interview with the Daily Telegraph in 2012, Gates talked about his relationship with Jobs, revealing that he had paid a lengthy visit to Jobs not long before his death. "We spent literally hours reminiscing and talking about the future," Gates said. He later wrote Jobs a letter in which, "I told Steve about how he should feel great about what he had done and the company he had built. I wrote about his kids, whom I had gotten to know. There was no peace to make," added Gates. "We were not at war. We made great products, and competition was always a positive thing. There was no cause for forgiveness."